Hi, I'm Camilla. I thought marriage meant joining a family, finding acceptance, maybe even gaining a second mother. Instead, on my first wedding anniversary, my mother-in-law Rosalind handed me an elegantly wrapped gift box containing divorce papers and a business card for her lawyer. No congratulations, no well wishes, just a cold smile and the words, "Time to set my son free from this mistake." Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow. I had planned a romantic dinner. I had bought champagne. I had spent weeks preparing a photo album of our first year together. And somehow I was still the problem that needed to be solved. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing she'd been orchestrating my removal from the family since the moment I said I do. And when I finally found my voice to fight back, she discovered that underestimating me was her first and biggest mistake. Before we dive into this story, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear if you've dealt with a toxic mother-in-law too. Because some battles aren't just about saving your marriage. They're about refusing to disappear quietly when someone tries to erase you. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Ashworth estate in Millbrook Heights, the evening sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn that probably cost more to maintain than my annual salary. The house loomed before me, 3 stories of limestone and arrogance, with windows that seemed to watch and judge every movement in the courtyard below. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the anniversary gift on the passenger seat, wrapped in silver paper that had taken me 45 minutes to get just right. Stupid, really, how much I still cared about impressing her after a full year of subtle disapproval disguised as helpful suggestions. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. It always did. Rosalind Ashworth stood there in her signature cream-colored suit, every silver hair perfectly arranged, her smile as polished and cold as the marble foyer behind her. She was the kind of woman who made you feel underdressed even when you weren't, who could communicate volumes of disdain with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. "Camilla, darling," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that made my name sound like an apology. "Right on time. How punctual." I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the imported Italian tile that she'd mentioned cost more than most people's cars. The house smelled of expensive flowers and furniture polish, everything pristine and untouchable, just like the family I had married into. "Where's Dylan?" I asked, glancing toward the living room where we usually gathered for these monthly dinners that felt more like performance evaluations. "Running late from the office as usual. You know how dedicated he is to the family business." She emphasized family business the way she always did, as if to remind me that some circles would forever remain closed to outsiders like me. We moved into the formal dining room, where the table was set for 3 with her grandmother's china, the set she'd made clear would never be passed down to someone who hadn't grown up understanding its value. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, casting tiny rainbows that seemed to mock the heaviness settling in my chest. "I brought something for you," I said, holding out the carefully wrapped box containing a vintage silk scarf I'd found at an estate sale. It was beautiful, expensive, and exactly the kind of understated luxury she claimed to appreciate. Rosalind accepted it with the same enthusiasm she might show for a tax bill. "How thoughtful." She set it aside without unwrapping it. "Actually, I have something for you too, a little anniversary gift." My heart lifted, despite myself. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe after a year of trying to prove myself worthy of her son, she was finally ready to accept me into the family. She disappeared into her study and returned with an elegant white box tied with a silver ribbon. It was heavier than I expected. Substantial. My pulse quickened with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Go ahead," she urged, settling into her chair with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Open it." I slid off the ribbon, lifted the lid, and pushed aside layers of tissue paper. Inside, nestled like a snake in silk, were legal documents. The letterhead read Whitmar, Pierce and Associates, Family Law. The words Petition for Divorce swam before my eyes in elegant serif font. For a moment, the world went completely silent. Not the peaceful silence of a summer evening, but the hollow, airless quiet that comes right before something breaks forever. I took the liberty of consulting with the best divorce attorney in the city. Harold Whitmore has handled several high-profile cases, very discreet. He's already drawn up the preliminary paperwork to make things as smooth as possible for Dylan. I stared at the papers, my vision blurring at the edges. The champagne I'd left chilling in my apartment suddenly seemed like the most naive purchase in history. "I don't understand," I whispered, though of course I understood perfectly well.
Rosalind leaned back in her chair, completely composed. "Camilla, you're a lovely girl, but you were never going to be the right fit for this family. Dylan was infatuated, but infatuation fades. It's time for him to marry someone who can truly support his future, someone who understands our world, our expectations." She paused to sip her wine, as if she were discussing the weather instead of dismantling my entire life. "The prenup you signed was quite thorough, as I'm sure you remember. This doesn't have to be unpleasant. Sign the papers, take the settlement, and everyone can move forward gracefully." I looked around the dining room, at the oil paintings of Ashworth ancestors, who had never accepted me, at the silver service that would never grace my own table, at the woman who had spent a year systematically undermining my marriage while smiling to my face. "Does Dylan know about this?" I managed to ask. Something flickered across her expression. Was it uncertainty? "Dylan will understand that this is for the best. He always has trusted my judgment in important matters." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about removing me from Dylan's life. This was about proving that Rosalind Ashworth still controlled every aspect of her son's world, that she could undo his choices as easily as rearranging flowers. I stood up slowly, the divorce papers still clutched in my trembling hands. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the foundation of everything I'd built over the past year was shifting beneath my feet. "You planned this," I said quietly. "From the beginning, you've been planning this." Rosalind's smile never wavered. "I've been protecting my family. There's a difference." As I walked toward the door on unsteady legs, I heard her call out behind me, "The papers need to be filed within 30 days if you want the full settlement amount. Harold's contact information is included." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Because if I had, she would have seen something in my eyes that might have warned her about what was coming. The cool evening air hit my face like a slap as I stood on her perfect front steps, divorce papers in one hand, my unused anniversary gift still clutched in the other. In the distance, I could hear the sound of Dylan's car turning into the driveway. My husband was coming home to a family dinner where his mother had just tried to end his marriage without telling him. And somehow, I was the problem that needed to be solved. But as I walked to my car, something inside me shifted. Not toward anger, not yet. Toward something colder and far more dangerous. Clarity. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business. The drive home from the Ashworth estate felt like navigating through thick fog, even though the September evening was crystal clear. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white, and somewhere in the back of my mind I registered that I was probably driving too slowly for the winding roads of Millbrook Heights. The divorce papers sat on my passenger seat like a venomous snake, the elegant legal letterhead catch streetlight every time we passed under a lamp. Harold Whitmore, attorney at law. Dissolution of marriage. Irreconcilable differences. The words swam together in my peripheral vision, each phrase another nail in the coffin of my year-long marriage. I pulled into the parking garage of our downtown loft, the one that Dylan had insisted we rent because it was more our style than moving into the guest house on his mother's property.
At the time, I'd thought it was sweet that he wanted our own space. Now I realized it probably had been Rosalind's idea, keeping me at arm's length from the family compound. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt endless. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors, my dark hair still perfectly styled from the dinner I'd prepared for, my dress still wrinkle-free, my lipstick barely smudged. I looked exactly the same as I had 3 hours ago, when I believed I was married to a man whose mother was slowly learning to accept me. Dylan's keys were already on the kitchen counter when I walked in. He must have come home while I was still processing the nuclear bomb that his mother had dropped in my lap. I could hear him in his study, probably on another late-night call with Tokyo or London, the kind of dedication to the family import business that Rosalind never failed to praise. I set the divorce papers down on our dining table, next to the bottle of Dom Perignon I'd bought to celebrate our first anniversary. The champagne suddenly looked ridiculous, an expensive joke that nobody would ever get to enjoy. "Cam, that you?" Dylan called from down the hall. "How was dinner with Mom? Sorry I missed it. The Singapore deal hit another snag." I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came out. How do you tell your husband that his mother just ambushed you with divorce papers? How do you explain that the woman who raised him spent the evening calmly dismantling your marriage over crystal glasses and imported wine? "Cam." His voice was closer now, and I heard his footsteps on the hardwood floor. "Everything okay?"
Dylan appeared in the doorway of our dining room, still wearing his navy suit, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from trying to prove yourself worthy of a legacy that had been handed down through 4 generations of Ashworth men. His eyes went immediately to the papers spread across our table, then to my face, then back to the papers. I watched the confusion flicker across his features, followed by something that looked almost like recognition. "What is this?" he asked quietly, but I could tell from his tone that he already knew. "Your anniversary present," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "From your mother." Dylan moved closer to the table, his gaze scanning the legal documents. I saw his jaw tighten as he read Harold Whitmore's letterhead, saw the exact moment when the reality of what his mother had done hit him fully. "She didn't," he breathed. "Oh, she did. She even picked out the lawyer for me. Very thoughtful, really. She said Harold Whitmore is discreet and has handled several high-profile cases." Dylan sank into one of our dining chairs, running both hands through his dark hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as his response to stress he couldn't immediately fix. "Cam, I swear to you, I had no idea she was planning this." "Didn't you?" The question came out sharper than I had intended, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. "Because she seemed very confident that you'd understand this was for the best. She said you've always trusted her judgment in important matters." He looked up at me then, and I saw something crumble in his expression. "That's not... I would never... Cam, you have to know I would never agree to this." "Do you?" "Because your mother seemed to think that your infatuation with me was fading, and that it was time for you to marry someone who understands your world and can truly support your future." Each word felt like a small act of violence, but I couldn't stop. A year of swallowed criticism, a year of being treated like an interloper in my own marriage, a year of pretending that Rosalind's constant undermining was just maternal concern. It all came pouring out. "She said the prenup I signed was quite thorough," I continued, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "She offered me a settlement to disappear gracefully. She planned this entire thing like a business transaction, Dylan, like I was just another acquisition that hadn't worked out." Dylan stood up abruptly, pacing to our floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city lights. "She had no right to do any of this without talking to me first." "But she did do it, and she was so confident you'd go along with it that she presented it to me like a done deal. So tell me, Dylan, was she wrong to be confident?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside our windows, the city hummed with late-night energy. People heading home from dinners and dates, and normal anniversary celebrations where nobody's mother-in-law tried to end their marriage over dessert. When Dylan finally turned back to me, his face was a map of conflict. My mother has very strong opinions about what's best for the family. She always has. And sometimes she acts on those opinions without consulting anyone else. That's not an answer. Cam, I love you. You know I love you. But? He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. But she's not entirely wrong about the challenges. You've seen how some of the family events go. The charity galas, the business dinners. You've said yourself that you feel out of place sometimes. Something cold and sharp twisted in my chest. So because I didn't grow up with a trust fund and a summer house in the Hamptons, your mother gets to decide our marriage is a mistake? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Dylan? Because your mother just handed me divorce papers and told me I was never going to be the right fit for this family. And now you're standing here talking about challenges and how I feel out of place at charity galas. So what exactly are you saying? He moved toward me, reaching for my hands, but I stepped back. The distance between us suddenly felt measured in more than just feet. I need to talk to my mother. I need to make it clear that she can't make decisions about our marriage. You need to choose, right now, tonight, me or her. Because I'm not going to spend the rest of my life being slowly erased by a woman who thinks I'm not good enough for her son. The ultimatum hung in the air between us, heavier than I had expected it to be. I hadn't planned to say it, but once the words were out, I realized they were true. This wasn't just about the divorce papers. This was about a year of death by 1,000 cuts, a year of being made to feel like a guest in my own marriage. Dylan stared at me, and I could see him weighing his options. His mother, who had raised him and guided every major decision of his life, or his wife, who was asking him to finally stand up to the woman who had shaped him.
Cam, it doesn't have to be that black and white. It does, I said quietly. It absolutely does. Because your mother made it black and white when she handed me divorce papers as an anniversary gift. She declared war, Dylan. The only question now is which side you're on. The silence that followed was answer enough. I walked to our bedroom and pulled out the suitcase I'd bought for our honeymoon in Italy, back when I had believed I was joining a family that would eventually accept me. As I began folding clothes with mechanical precision, I heard Dylan on the phone in the living room, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Mother, we need to talk. Now." But it was too late for talking. It was too late for explanations or apologies or promises that things would be different. Because in that moment of hesitation, in those few seconds when Dylan had weighed his options instead of choosing me immediately and completely, Rosalind Ashworth had won. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that she had also awakened something in me that had been dormant for far too long. Something that would make her very, very sorry she had underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. As I zipped up my suitcase and prepared to leave the life I'd tried so hard to build, one thought echoed in my mind with crystal clarity. If Rosalind Ashworth wanted a war, she was about to get one, and I was done fighting fair. 3 days had passed since I'd walked out of the loft with nothing but a suitcase and the taste of betrayal still bitter in my mouth. I'd been staying at my best friend Jade's apartment in the Arts District, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and windows that let in streams of morning light that felt nothing like the cold perfection of Millbrook Heights. Jade worked as a gallery curator, which meant she understood the art of presentation better than most people. She also had a network of contacts that stretched from struggling artists to hedge fund managers who collected 7-figure paintings as tax write-offs.
Most importantly, she had no patience for people who tried to make others feel small. "You look like someone who's been hit by a truck," she said, setting a cup of coffee down next to where I sat hunched over her laptop at her kitchen island. But not in a defeated way, more like someone who's planning to hit back. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent the last 3 days in a strange state of hyperclarity, my mind moving at speeds I didn't know I was capable of. Sleep came in fits and starts, but instead of feeling exhausted, I felt energized by a cold, calculating anger that was nothing like the hot fury I'd felt in the loft. "I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with," I said, scrolling through the search results on my screen. Harold Whitmore, attorney at law, had yielded pages of information, including several articles about high-profile divorce cases he handled for wealthy families in Millbrook Heights. But it was the deeper digging that had proven more interesting. Property records showing that the Ashworth Family Trust owned significantly more real estate than they claimed. Financial records that suggested the family import business was struggling more than anyone knew. And, most intriguingly, society page photos from the last 5 years that told a story of a family desperately trying to maintain an image they could barely afford. "Rosalind isn't just trying to protect Dylan from an unsuitable wife," I said, taking notes on a legal pad that was already covered in my scarchy handwriting. "She's trying to protect the family from a scandal they can't afford, literally." Jade peered over my shoulder at the screen. "What kind of scandal?" I pulled up a folder of screenshots I'd been collecting. Bank statements I'd found in Dylan's study when we were doing our taxes, investment portfolios that had been left open on his laptop, financial documents that I assumed were just boring business paperwork. The kind where the heir to a 4-generation import dynasty married a girl from the wrong side of town who happens to be a forensic accountant, I said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy with implication, because that's what I was. What I'd always been, even though I'd been so busy trying to fit into Dylan's world that I'd stopped using the skills that had gotten me out of my own humble beginnings in the first place. "You think they're hiding money problems?" Jade asked. "I think they're hiding insolvency, the kind that would destroy their social standing if anyone found out. And I think Rosalind realized that staying married to someone who reviews financial statements for a living might not be the best strategy for keeping family secrets buried." I opened another browser tab and pulled up the social calendar for Millbrook Heights. The autumn Sarity season was in full swing, with galas and fundraisers scheduled almost every weekend through November. But one event stood out among the rest, an invitation-only auction and dinner to benefit the Millbrook Heights Historical Preservation Society, hosted by none other than Rosalind Ashworth herself. "She's throwing a party," I said, staring at the elegant announcement with its gold foil lettering and museum-quality photography.
And I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of a plan beginning to form in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle finding its shape. And she's about to learn that underestimating me was the biggest mistake she ever made. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my old boss at Morrison Financial Services, where I'd worked before Dylan and I got married. The second was to a private investigator who specialized in asset recovery for divorce cases. The third was to my sister Emma, who worked in event planning for some of the biggest names in the city. By noon, I had a job offer, a reconnaissance report, and access to a network of vendors who could put together a world-class event on short notice. By evening, I had something much more valuable, a comprehensive financial analysis of the Ashworth family holdings that painted a picture of a dynasty teetering on the edge of collapse. The import business that had made their fortune was hemorrhaging money due to increased competition and shipping costs. The real estate portfolio that looked impressive on paper was mortgaged to the hilt. The trust fund that was supposed to secure Dylan's future had been raided repeatedly to cover operating expenses and lifestyle maintenance.
Most damaging of all, there were discrepancies in the charitable foundation's books, the same foundation that hosted the annual Historical Preservation Gala. Money that was supposed to be going to preserve local landmarks was instead being funneled into personal accounts to cover everything from mortgage payments to country club dues. It wasn't just financial mismanagement, it was fraud, and Rosalind Ashworth had been signing the checks. "This is nuclear," Jade said, looking over the documents spread across her dining table. "If this gets out, it won't just destroy their reputation, she could go to prison." "Which is exactly why she wanted me gone," I replied, highlighting another suspicious transaction. "She probably realized what I did for a living about the time I started asking about the tax documents Dylan brought home. A forensic accountant married to the family heir? That's not just a social mismatch, that's a liability she couldn't afford." My phone buzzed with a text message. "Dylan, for the 5th time since I'd left, can we please talk? I know you're angry, but we can work through this. Mom is willing to apologize." I stared at the message, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. An apology. As if gifting someone divorce papers was a social faux pas that could be smoothed over with a carefully worded mea culpa. I typed back a single word, "No." Then I blocked his number. Emma arrived that evening with fabric samples, vendor catalogs, and the kind of predatory smile that made her one of the most sought-after event planners in the city. She spread everything across Jade's coffee table like a general planning a military campaign. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said, pulling out her tablet and opening a floor plan application. I handed her the invitation to Rosalind's Historical Preservation Society Gala. "I'm thinking that the same weekend she's hosting her little fundraiser, someone else is going to be hosting a much more interesting party. Same neighborhood, same guest list, much better entertainment." "What kind of entertainment?" I smiled for the first time in days, and even I could tell it wasn't a particularly warm expression. "The kind where everyone in Millbrook Heights learns exactly who they've been writing checks to and exactly where their charitable donations have actually been going." Emma's grin matched mine. "A rival gala. I like it. What's your budget?" "Unlimited," I said, pulling out the credit card that I'd been keeping for emergencies. "Because this isn't just a party. It's a public execution, and I want to make sure everyone has a front row seat." Over the next week, everything fell into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. Emma secured a venue, the Grandview Mansion, a sprawling estate just 3 blocks from the Ashworth property that had been recently restored and was available for private events. Jade used her gallery connections to arrange for museum-quality displays that would showcase financial documents with the same care usually reserved for priceless artwork. I hired a string quartet, a renowned chef, and a photographer who specialized in capturing moments that would look perfect on the society pages. Every detail was designed to mirror the elegance of Rosalind's event, but with one crucial difference. Where her party would be about preserving the past, mine would be about exposing it. The invitations went out 8 days before the event, hand-delivered by courier to every major donor on the Historical Preservation Society's mailing list. The wording was carefully crafted to sound like an exclusive preview of important discoveries related to local history. No lies, just creative presentation. "You realize there's no going back from this," Jade said as we watched the last courier disappear down her street. "Once you light this fire, it's going to burn everything down." I thought about Dylan's hesitation when I'd asked him to choose between his mother and me. I thought about Rosalind's cold smile as she handed me divorce papers wrapped in silver ribbon. I thought about a year of being made to feel like I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or refined enough to belong in their world. "Good," I said. "Let it burn."
The RSVPs started coming in within hours. Apparently, the promise of exclusive access to newly discovered historical documents was exactly the kind of thing that got the attention of people who collected secrets the way others collected art. 3 days before the party, I received an unexpected phone call from Dylan. He'd apparently gotten a new number after I'd blocked his old one. "Camilla, what are you doing?" His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "People are talking about some party you're throwing. My mother is—"
Your mother is what, Dylan? Concerned? Worried that someone might ask uncomfortable questions about where all that charity money actually went? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. "Don't do this," he said quietly. "Please, we can work things out. We can fix this." "Fix what, exactly? Your mother trying to end our marriage? You're choosing her over me when it mattered. Or the fact that your family has been stealing from charities to pay for your lifestyle? You don't understand how complicated." I hung up. 2 days before the event, Rosalind herself called. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made me pick up. "Camilla." Her voice was arctic. "I think it's time we had a conversation. I think it's time you learned that actions have consequences. See you at the party, Rosalind. I promise it will be unforgettable." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not with fear, but with anticipation, because tomorrow night, the woman who thought she could dispose of me like yesterday's newspaper was going to discover exactly what kind of enemy she'd made. The Grandview mansion looked like something from a fairy tale as guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished marble floors, and the autumn evening air carried the scent of jasmine from the perfectly manicured gardens. Emma had outdone herself. Every detail was flawless, from the champagne fountain in the foyer to the string quartet playing softly in the corner. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching Millbrook Heights society filter into my carefully orchestrated trap. The cream silk dress I'd chosen was elegant, but understated, the kind of outfit that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Jade had insisted on professional styling, and I had to admit that the woman looking back at me from the mansion's mirrors bore little resemblance to the uncertain girl who had once struggled to fit into Ashworth family dinners. Mrs. Wellington arrived first, draped in diamonds and curiosity. Behind her came the Harringtons, the Prescotts, and a steady stream of the same faces who graced every important social event in the city. These were people who collected gossip like fine wine, storing it away until the perfect moment for uncorking. "Camilla, darling," Mrs. Wellington swept toward me as I descended the staircase. "What an intriguing invitation. Historical documents, you said? How deliciously mysterious." "I think you'll find tonight very educational," I replied with a smile that felt natural for the first time in weeks. "The displays are in the East Wing, but please, enjoy the cocktail hour first." As more guests arrived, I noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere that always preceded major social drama. Conversations had that particular buzz of anticipation, the kind that happened when people sensed blood in the water, but weren't quite sure whose blood it would be. At 7:30 p.m., Dylan arrived alone. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept in days, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and I saw a mixture of pleading and resignation in his expression. He started to move toward me, but I turned away, disappearing into a cluster of guests discussing the impressive array of hors d'oeuvres. Rosalind made her entrance at exactly 8 o'clock, because, of course she did. She wore deep emerald silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and her silver hair was arranged in an elaborate updo that undoubtedly required a professional team. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting air kisses and compliments as if this were her own party. When her eyes found mine, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She approached with the measured stride of a predator who still believed she was the apex species in this particular ecosystem. "Camilla," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby guests to overhear. "What a surprising event! I had no idea you were so interested in historical preservation." "Oh, I'm very interested in preserving the truth. In fact, that's exactly what tonight is about. Shall I show you to the displays?" Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of genuine fear. But her social training was too ingrained to let it show for more than a heartbeat. "How thoughtful," she said. "Lead the way." The walk to the East Wing felt like a procession. Word had somehow spread that the hostess and guest of honor were heading to see the mysterious historical documents, and a growing crowd followed in our wake.
Mrs. Wellington practically vibrated with excitement, while other guests whispered speculatively behind gloved hands. The display room was Emma's masterpiece. Professional lighting illuminated a series of museum-quality cases, each containing carefully arranged financial documents. But instead of dusty historical artifacts, these cases held bank statements, canceled checks, and investment reports, all beautifully presented with explanatory placards written in elegant calligraphy.
The first display case contained the Ashworth family's financial overview from the past 5 years. Income statements, property assessments, and debt obligations laid out with clinical precision. The numbers told a story of decline that would be immediately recognizable to anyone who understood basic economics. How fascinating! Mrs. Wellington breathed, leaning closer to read the placard that explained the family's mounting debt obligations. I had no idea the import business was struggling so significantly. Rosalind's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. These appear to be private financial documents, she said, her voice tight. I'm not sure how appropriate it is to display them in this manner. Oh, but these aren't private, I replied sweetly. These are all public records. Property filings, corporate disclosures, charity reports. Anyone could access them with the right research skills. The second display case was more damaging. It contained 5 years of reports from the Historical Preservation Society, showing donations received versus actual preservation projects completed. The discrepancy was staggering. Millions of dollars in donations, but only a fraction of that amount actually spent on historical preservation. My goodness, Mr. Harrington muttered, adjusting his glasses to read the fine print. Where did all this money go? That's when I unveiled the third display case, and the room fell completely silent. Personal bank statements, credit card bills, mortgage payments, country club dues, private school tuition payments for Dylan's cousins, all of it funded by money that had been donated to preserve local historical landmarks. These are forgeries, Rosalind said, but her voice lacked conviction. Several guests were already taking photos with their phones, documenting the evidence with the enthusiasm of amateur investigators. Actually, they're not, I replied, producing a folder of authentication documents. I had everything verified by a certified forensic accounting firm. That's what I do for a living, you know. I find money that's gone missing. The crowd around us had grown larger, and I could see faces in the back straining to get a better view. Mrs. Wellington was practically bouncing on her toes, while other guests exchanged meaningful looks that promised weeks of dinner party conversations. This is ridiculous, Dylan said, appearing suddenly at his mother's side. Camilla, what are you trying to accomplish here? I'm trying to show everyone exactly who they've been donating their money to, and exactly why your mother was so eager to get rid of me. It turns out that having a forensic accountant in the family isn't very convenient when you're embezzling charitable donations. The word embezzling hit the room like a physical blow. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Rosalind drew herself up to her full height, desperation finally breaking through her social armor. You will not stand here and be accused of criminal activity by some gold-digging nobody who married into this family under false pretenses. The insult was calculated to wound, but it bounced off me like water off glass, because standing there, surrounded by the evidence of her crimes, with the entire Millbrook Heights social elite bearing witness to her downfall, I realized something profound. Her opinion of me had never mattered. None of their opinions had mattered. I had spent so much time trying to prove I belonged in their world that I'd forgotten I didn't actually want to belong there. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room.
I did marry into this family under false pretenses. I thought I was marrying into a family of honorable people. I thought social standing meant something more than the ability to steal money from charities without getting caught. I gestured toward the display cases. But the evidence speaks for itself. 5 years of financial fraud. Hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen from organizations dedicated to preserving our city's history. Money that was supposed to restore landmarks and educate children, instead used to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't actually afford. Mr. Prescott stepped forward, his face grim. He'd been the largest single donor to the Historical Preservation Society for the past 3 years. Are you saying that our donations never went to preservation projects? I'm saying that less than 30% of donations actually made it to legitimate preservation work. The rest went into personal accounts controlled by the Ashworth Family Trust. The room erupted. Voices rose in outrage, questions flew, and phones appeared as guests began documenting everything they could. Mrs. Wellington was already typing furiously on her device, probably alerting every gossip columnist in the city. Rosalind looked around the room with growing horror, watching decades of carefully cultivated reputation crumble in real time. This was her world. These were her people, and they were witnessing her complete and total humiliation. "You little bitch," she hissed, abandoning all pretense of social grace. "You have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done. I've given everyone the truth you tried so hard to hide, the truth you were willing to destroy my marriage to protect." Dylan stepped between us, his face ashen. "Camilla, please, can we discuss this privately?" "There's nothing left to discuss. Your mother made her choice when she handed me divorce papers. You made yours when you chose her over me. And I made mine when I decided that some secrets are too dangerous to keep."
The crowd was pressing closer now, everyone wanting to hear every word of what had become the social scandal of the decade. Camera flashes went off as guests documented the confrontation, ensuring that this moment would be preserved forever in the digital equivalent of Society page archives. "The authorities have already been notified," I announced, my voice carrying over the chaos. "The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit is very interested in cases involving charity fraud. I expect they'll want to speak with everyone who's been involved in the Historical Preservation Society's financial management." That's when Rosalind finally broke. The mask of social superiority slipped completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. She lunged toward me, her perfectly manicured nails aimed at my face, but Dylan caught her arms before she could make contact. "Mom, stop," he pleaded. "You're making it worse." But there was no worse left to make. The damage was complete, total, irreversible. Rosalind Ashworth had just assaulted someone in front of 50 witnesses while standing next to evidence of her own financial crimes. Her fall from grace wasn't just public, it was spectacular. Security guards I'd hired for the evening stepped forward, gently but firmly, escorting both Dylan and Rosalind toward the exit. As they disappeared through the doorway, I could hear Rosalind's voice rising in incoherent fury, promising lawsuits and threats that everyone in the room knew were empty. The silence that followed their departure was pregnant with possibility. 50 of the most influential people in Millbrook Heights had just witnessed the complete destruction of one of their most prominent families. The social earthquake that would follow would reshape the entire landscape of the city's elite circles. Mrs. Wellington was the first to break the silence. "My dear," she said, approaching me with something that looked almost like respect, "that was the most educational evening I've had in years." As guests began to filter out, most stopped to offer their business cards, their congratulations, or their assurances that they had always suspected something was wrong with the Ashworth family finances. The social tide had turned completely. I was no longer the outsider trying to fit in. I was the brave whistleblower who had exposed corruption at the highest levels of society. By the time the last guest departed, leaving only Emma, Jade, and me standing among the empty champagne glasses and scattered evidence displays, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. peace. 6 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office at Blackstone Investigations, watching the morning sun paint the city skyline in shades of gold and amber. The view was spectacular, a far cry from the cramped cubicle I'd occupied at Morrison Financial Services before my marriage. The brass nameplate on my door read, Camilla Rivera, Senior Partner, and every time I saw it, I felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with reclaiming myself. The Ashworth scandal had made national news. Not just the financial fraud, though that alone would have been enough to destroy them, but the spectacular nature of their falldown at what the press had dubbed the Truth Gala. Mrs. Wellington had given an exclusive interview to Vanity Fair, describing the evening as the most deliciously devastating social event in decades. The article had run with photos from the party, including several shots of the evidence displays that had sealed Rosalind's fate. The legal consequences had been swift and merciless. Rosalind was facing federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion. The Historical Preservation Society had filed a massive civil suit to recover the stolen funds. Dylan had been named as a co-defendant in several cases, though his lawyer was arguing that he'd been kept ignorant of his mother's financial manipulations. I might have felt sorry for him if he hadn't spent the last 6 months trying to contact me through increasingly desperate intermediaries. Mutual friends, distant relatives, even my own sister had all been enlisted to carry messages of regret and pleas for reconciliation. The divorce papers had been finalized 3 months ago, with Dylan agreeing to a settlement that was far more generous than anything Rosalind had originally offered. My phone buzzed with a text from Jade. Lunch at Meridian? I have gossip that will make your day. I smiled, typing back a quick yes. Jade had become something of a celebrity in the art world after the scandal broke, with several wealthy families suddenly very interested in hiring a gallery curator who clearly understood the importance of proper documentation and provenance. Her client list had tripled, and she'd moved into a penthouse apartment in the museum district. Meridian was the kind of restaurant where Millbrook Heights society used to gather for long lunches, filled with carefully orchestrated conversations about charity work and social positioning. Now it had become something different, a place where people came to see and to be seen by the new power structures that had emerged from the rubble of old scandals. I arrived to find Jade already seated at a prime table near the windows, her red hair catching the light like spun copper. She was reading something on her phone with the kind of expression that suggested either very good news or very bad news for someone. Tell me you haven't been arrested for anything, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. Better than that, she replied, turning her phone toward me. Rosalind's sentencing hearing is next week, and word is she's going to allocution. I raised an eyebrow. She's going to admit guilt publicly?
Not just admit guilt. Apparently, she's planning to name names. Every family, every business, every individual who knew about the fraud and looked the other way because it was convenient. The implications hit me immediately. Rosalind wasn't going down alone. She was taking half of Millbrook Heights with her. The scandal I'd started with one party was about to become a full-scale investigation into decades of financial corruption among the city's elite families. "How do you know all this?" I asked. Jade grinned. "Mrs. Wellington's daughter works at the prosecutor's office. Apparently, Rosalind's lawyer thinks cooperation is her only chance at a reduced sentence." I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction at the thought of Rosalind facing justice, but mostly I felt something I hadn't expected, relief that it was finally truly over. "You know what the strangest part is?" I said. "I don't feel angry anymore. Not at her, not at Dylan, not at any of them." "That's called healing," Jade replied, "also known as winning so completely that revenge becomes irrelevant." She wasn't wrong. The life I'd built in the aftermath of the scandal was better than anything I'd had during my marriage. Blackstone Investigations had been founded by 3 women who specialized in financial crimes, and they'd recruited me after reading about my role in exposing the Ashworth fraud. My colleagues were brilliant, driven professionals who respected expertise over social connections. My work was challenging and meaningful. We'd already helped recover millions in stolen assets for fraud victims across the country. More importantly, I'd remembered who I was outside of someone else's expectations.
The girl who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for college, who'd earned her CPA certification through night school, who'd built a successful career before Dylan Ashworth ever walked into my life. That person had gotten lost somewhere in the marble hallways of Millbrook Heights. But she was back now, stronger and wiser for the experience. "There's something else," Jade said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Emil got a call yesterday from someone who wants to hire you specifically." "For what?" "Apparently, there's a wealthy family in Boston whose daughter-in-law thinks her mother-in-law might be embezzling from their charitable foundation. She read about what happened with the Ashworths and wants someone who understands how these family dynamics work." I felt a familiar tingle of professional interest. Another family, another web of secrets and financial manipulation, another chance to uncover the truth that powerful people wanted to keep buried. "Did you give Emma my number?" "Already done. Her name is Patricia Chen, and she sounds desperate. Familiar story. Married into money, treated like an outsider, starting to notice discrepancies in the books." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from being the unwanted daughter-in-law to becoming the person other unwanted daughter-in-laws called when they needed someone to fight their battles. There was a certain poetic justice to it. That evening, I drove through Millbrook Heights for the first time since the night of the party. The neighborhood looked the same. Perfectly manicured lawns, imposing gates, houses that whispered old money and older secrets. But it felt different now, smaller somehow, as if exposure to sunlight had revealed how artificial the whole ecosystem really was. I passed the Ashworth estate, which was dark and empty behind a for sale sign that listed a price significantly lower than what the property had been worth a year ago. The scandal had tainted everything associated with the family name, making even their real estate a liability. 3 blocks away, the Grandview Mansion stood like a monument to that one perfect evening when truth had triumphed over manipulation. Emma had told me that the mansion's bookings had increased dramatically after the party. Apparently, hosting a scandalous event was excellent publicity for an event venue. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment building's parking garage. The caller ID showed a Boston number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Rivera, this is Patricia Chen. I believe Jade Mason gave you your number." Her voice was shaky, uncertain, but underneath the nervousness I heard something familiar. The steel core that develops when someone has been pushed too far for too long. "She did," I replied. "Why don't you tell me what's been happening?" For the next 30 minutes, I listened to a story that was both eerily familiar and completely unique. A controlling mother-in-law who treated her daughter-in-law like an interloper, charitable foundations with suspicious financial records, a husband caught between loyalty to his mother and love for his wife, family money that might not be as secure as everyone believed. I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but something feels wrong and I don't know who else to trust. "You're not being paranoid. Trust your instincts. They're probably right." By the time we finished talking, I'd agreed to take the case. Not because I needed the money or the professional challenge, but because I remembered what it felt like to be gaslit and undermined by people who were supposed to love you. I remembered the isolation of knowing something was wrong, but having no one believe you. Most importantly, I remembered what it felt like to finally fight back and win.
Later that night, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea and a legal pad, beginning to plan my approach to the Chen case. Outside my windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, and I could hear the faint sound of traffic and nightlife, the soundtrack of a world that was alive and dynamic and full of possibility. My reflection in the dark glass looked back at me, and I saw someone I barely recognized from the uncertain woman who'd once tried so desperately to fit into Rosalind Ashworth's world. This woman had confidence that came from surviving betrayal and emerging stronger. She had professional success that was entirely her own achievement. She had friends who valued her for who she was, rather than who she might help them become. She was enough, more than enough. The next morning brought news that Rosalind's sentencing hearing had been moved up by a week due to her cooperation with federal investigators. The story was already breaking on financial news networks, with reporters speculating about which prominent families might be implicated in the expanding investigation. I turned off the television and returned to my case files.
Whatever happened to Rosalind Ashworth was no longer my concern. She'd taught me an invaluable lesson about my own strength and resilience, though probably not in the way she'd intended. Justice was being served, truth was being revealed, and I had work to do. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building a life so fulfilling that their opinions become irrelevant. Sometimes walking away from people who try to make you smaller is the first step toward becoming everything you were meant to be. And sometimes when toxic people try to gift you endings, they're actually giving you the chance to write a completely new beginning. As I prepared to leave for Boston to meet Patricia Chin in person, I thought about the anniversary dinner that had started this entire journey. The divorce papers wrapped in silver ribbon, the cold smile, the certainty that I could be discarded like an inconvenient mistake. Rosalind Ashworth had been wrong about many things, but she'd be right about one. It was time for a divorce. Not just from Dylan, but from every person and situation that had tried to convince me I wasn't worthy of respect, love, and belonging. The woman who walked out of my apartment that morning was someone who had learned that family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about people who choose to value you. That success isn't about fitting into someone else's world. It's about building your own. That the most dangerous thing you can do to people who underestimate you is prove them spectacularly wrong. Some gifts come wrapped in cruelty, but contain the seeds of transformation. And some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. Have you ever had someone try to write you out of their story, only to discover they'd given you the freedom to write your own? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more tales of people who refused to disappear quietly when others tried to erase them. Because here's what I learned from Rosalind Ashworth's gift of divorce papers. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most end up being the ones who set us free. They just don't realize it until it's too late to take it back. Your worth isn't determined by who accepts you. It's determined by who you become when you finally stop asking for permission to exist.